We've got a number of people in, so let's jump into it. So welcome everybody to our Center for Pedestrian and Bicyclist Safety webinar titled Right Turn on Red Maneuvers, Vulnerable Road User Safety Concerns, presented by Dr. Bruce Appleyard and Dr. Anurag Pande. My name is Nick Ferenchak. I'm the director for the Center for Pedestrian and Bicyclist Safety and a professor in the Civil Engineering Department at the University of New Mexico. So our Center for Pedestrian and Bicyclist Safety is a 5-year university transportation center that's supported by US DOT. We consist of University of New Mexico, San Diego State, University of California, Berkeley, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. We've got a ton of research going on, so please check out our website, pedbikesafety.org. We've also got our webinar series, as you know. We've got another one scheduled, I think, for 2 weeks from now, and then we're also scheduling a couple others throughout the spring and summer, so keep an eye out for those. We've got a newsletter as well. If you go to our website and go to the bottom, you can put in your email address to sign up for that. And then we've also got LinkedIn, where you can follow us, where we're always posting new projects and reports and papers. So let's jump into today's webinar. So throughout the webinar, if you have any questions or comments, I think we'll be taking those in the chat box, as well as you can also put them in the Q&A box as well. And then we'll moderate a Q&A session at the end. And our program manager, Ben Garland, will moderate that. And so without further ado, I'll introduce our presenters. So Dr. Appleyard is a professor in city and regional planning and public administration at San Diego State University with expertise in designing and creating livable streets and facilities for pedestrians and bicyclists, geospatial analysis, econometrics, and applied transportation and land use policy analysis. Dr. Appleyard is San Diego State's director for the Center for Pedestrian and Bicyclist Safety, as well as the Active Transportation Research Center. Dr. Appleyard recently authored Livable Streets 2.0 about the conflict, power, and promise of our streets, how to identify problems along streets and at intersections, and how to fix them. And Dr. Pandey is a professor of civil engineering at California Polytechnic State University, or Cal Poly. His research interests include traffic simulation, data mining applications, and observational data analysis, including in the areas of traffic safety and crashes, driver behavior, transportation resilience, and emergency evacuation. As the faculty liaison for community-based learning at Cal Poly, he has worked with Cal Poly faculty and local agencies to support projects of mutual benefit. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to our presenters.
Thanks so very much, Nick. It's Bruce Appleyard here. It's great to be with you. I'm a professor of city planning and urban design as well as public administration. And today I'm going to talk to you about right turn on red maneuvers, how it raises concerns for vulnerable road users. And it's great to be able to present with my colleague Anurag Pande. So let's talk a little about the statewide policy on right turn on red. Basically, in the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975, it required states to permit right turn on red maneuvers as mostly an energy saving measure. If you recall, in the mid 70s, there were serious energy concerns and energy crises that people had to deal with. So most states permit right turn on red as a general rule, unless otherwise prohibited at specific intersections via guidance from MUTCD. And state laws applicable in most jurisdictions of the country require right turn on red to remain legal at intersections unless a sign specifically prohibiting such maneuvers is posted. So here's some of the issues around right turn on red maneuvers. Basically, this diagram shows how as a driver approaches a red light and is going to make a right turn, they're usually looking left at traffic. And they're distracted by that. And they fail to see pedestrians or cyclists entering the crosswalks from the right, mostly. And so it's a series of failure to yield and a right turn violation to hit pedestrians and cyclists. So it's in many ways it's a failure to yield as a failure to drive with care and empathy. So it's a failure to drive with care and empathy in how you're approaching the intersections and conducting a failure to yield maneuver for a right turn on red movement. Now, what are some of the arguments for permitting right turn on red? Right turn on red maneuvers only represent a small proportion of intersection crashes. This is from Lord 2002. Drivers making right turn on red maneuvers are typically traveling at slow speeds, mitigating injury risk to pedestrians and cyclists. This is the finding from Fleck and Yee in 2002. And again, permitting right turn on red reduces congestion and improves efficiency um, uh, in relation to the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975. At least that's what the act itself attested. And we'll talk about that later today. So we went through all the data in California, and between 2011 and 2022, we looked at two different types of crashes. Because the data itself uh, doesn't um, call out right turn on red maneuvers, but there are two types of coding that allow us to identify what are likely related to right turn on red maneuvers. One is when the data shows that it's a right turn at intersections that relates to the collision or fatality, and the other is a yield violation, which is a failure to yield to pedestrians at a red light. And so we looked at these two data types and made some calculations. And in California, between 2011 and 2022, right turn collisions at signalized intersections are responsible for over 39,000 collisions and 217 fatalities overall. And you can see the numbers broken out by pedestrians and cyclists and also motor vehicle uh, occupants. Um, and this was also uh, significant in terms of yield violations as well. So 11% of the cyclist collisions are preceded by right turns compared with 7.1% of pedestrian collisions. So it's a little bit higher for the right turn at intersection collisions for cyclists than it is for pedestrians. Some of the arguments for prohibiting right turn red collisions include that right turn uh, red maneuvers disproportionately affect pedestrians and cyclists. This is from Zador in 1982. It creates an environment that feels less safe, even if actual crash risk is low. So this is very important, that it just feels less safe, even though there might be slower speed maneuvers and the actual crash risk is less. It just doesn't feel right. And so there's these issues of livability about our streets that right turn on red seems to undermine. Um, and recent before and after studies of intersections that have prohibited right turn on red maneuvers demonstrate a safer environment for vulnerable road users. And this is found in Washington, D.C. and Seattle. So we also looked at different intersections that were hotspots for right turn on red, right turns, and yield violations, and mostly focusing on right turns. The characteristic of intersections with highest number of right turns had no protected bike lanes, were near transit stops, in commercial areas with parking lots, and had relatively heavy, fast moving cross traffic. They also had irregular intersections that could add to driver distraction and confusion. So here's an example of a case study. This is uh, Van Owen Street and Reseda Boulevard in Los Angeles. And what we see here is we have a lot of parking lots. We have a lot of activities close to the street that are probably attracting some pedestrian and bicyclist activity. We also have an irregular intersection and a lot of cross traffic. And if we look at this image, we get a sense of the cross traffic and how that could lead to distraction for drivers and leading to more right turn and red collisions. Another example is La Brea and Sunset Boulevard. And again, we see the same situation of high level of land use activity and retail activity and fast food restaurants and things like that, attracting pedestrian and bicyclist activity, but also high levels of distracting cross traffic that could lead to the right turn on red maneuvers. I mean, again, we see a picture of La Brea at Sunset Boulevard here. We also looked at right turn on red collisions in relation to socioeconomic status. And we found that with each decrease in socioeconomic status, there is a rough correspondence to a 2.5% increase in the chance for right turn on red collisions or right turn collisions. And so we feel this is significant that areas of low income and people of color might have a higher incidence of right turn on red collisions. So there's arguments to prohibit them for those causes as well. So I think this is where I hand this off to Anurag.
Yes, thank you. And there are a few question and answers. I think it might, and some of them we can address right now, but I feel like most of the questions I think can potentially wait till the end because we do cover some of this ground, and we will talk a little bit about challenges of collision data, how it's set up in California, the way it's provided. It's kind of hard to tease out exactly if a crash happened during the red phase of that intersection. So that information was we were not able to decipher from the crash data. So we can talk a little bit about the collision data towards the end. So I see some good questions, and then we can have some nice discussions around that at the end. And this MUTCD guidelines, this is specific to the federal MUTCD, but California MUTCD in this regard is very similar. You know, so if you look at the prohibiting right turn on red, what's the guidance from MUTCD? It tells you unacceptable number of pedestrian conflicts with right turn on red maneuvers. So if you feel like there is an unacceptable number, then you can prohibit right turn on red. There is no, there is no marker on what that unacceptable number of conflict look like. Although we know that if you do put in right turn on red prohibition, you do have those conflicts going down. There's a lot of data on those conflicts coming down. So there is so this research, San Francisco SFMTA was very interested in uh, Metropolitan Transportation Agency was very interested in banning right turn on red, but what they learned was that so they mentioned that even if there is close calls or blocked crosswalk due to vehicular turns, did not always lead to injuries. It degraded the walking environment, and that's something that Bruce also alluded to. And this is something that SFMTA said in their memo as well in July 2023. So they wanted to prohibit it, but what they ultimately found was that the cost of putting the signage that's required right now to be able for any community to be able to ban right turn on red at these signs, it's going to be cost prohibitive. It's going to be a lot of signage on all approaches would be required, and they mentioned that there is no mechanism for any city to actually ban it citywide and just put up few signs at the boundary of the city or something like that. They have to put up signage at each intersection per the current policy. So that is the biggest challenge that statewide policy causes for communities that do want to prohibit it. So because communities do want to create some more welcoming environment for pedestrians for all other active modes, so it makes sense for them to prohibit it, but sometimes that can be challenging. Next slide, please. Bruce, can you give me? Oh, yeah, perfect. Thank you. So that's what I was trying to get at. These statewide policy of signage requirements creates a big barrier. And then specifically from that same SFMTA memo that I was mentioning earlier, under existing California law, right turn on red would continue to remain legal unless signed. So thereby any citywide approach would require, and they mentioned something like 1,300 traffic signals where they will have to put up that signage. And as I was saying, that would be cross prohibitive. Yeah, and I see some comments regarding New York City uh, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. Yes, there are cities that have prohibited it, but in California, you still require signage on each intersection. Next slide, please. Okay, perfect. And I want to allude to the emissions analysis question, and it's funny, like not necessarily funny in a joking way, but it's kind of interesting that we are kind of maybe heading towards similar crises with oil and whatnot, and how this policy came to be in the 1970s with the oil crises. But the idea was that right turn on red, obviously, you can make the right turn. But I think what some old research combined with some new work that Connecticut DOT did, they found that if you're allowing right turn on red, a lot of those movements are going to be the stop and go kind. So people will stop, then they'll make some progress, they'll still watch what's going on, and then make some more progress. And with the newer technology, the newer research suggests that that might actually be less fuel efficient than having the vehicle just come to a complete stop and then move once the light turns green. So that evidence on emissions may not be as direct as it used to be. So back in the 70s, the reasons we prohibited right turn on red, or we allowed right turn on red to continue, that may actually be less fuel efficient in today's day and age. So that could be, and may lead to more emissions because making right turn on red requires you to kind of make stop and go maneuver rather than just move through the intersection in one shot. And then because the factors that emissions impact depend on a lot of different factors like intersection geometry, traffic composition, and surrounding land use, enforcement of traffic laws, all of these things. And yeah, so I see a comment there like people are required to make a stop on right turn. But again, we know from practice that is almost certainly not the case. Very few drivers actually do that. Next slide, please. So what we wanted to highlight here is trying to take this question of this right turn on red and collision data and tie and being able to prohibit for communities to be able to prohibit right turn on red and tie that into the new paradigm for safety that we have adopted, right? That we have tried to adopt of the safe systems approach. So for example, as I said, mentioned earlier, it's very hard for us to tease out how many crashes actually occurred during vehicles making right turns specifically on red signal. But we do have some data on what happens on right turn at signalized intersection. So we do have data on right turn collisions at signalized intersection. So they were responsible for about 39,000 collisions and 217 fatalities. And and this is all fatalities, right? In pedestrians, bicyclists, and automobile occupants. However, the biggest chunk of these, over half the collisions and 134 out of the 217 fatalities were in fact pedestrian and bicyclist. So this is like, if you want to just get some context of what we're talking about, California has about 200,000 reported crashes and about 4,000 fatalities. So number, I think you would say that, 217 and 134 pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities represents a somewhat, low number, right? However, if you think about safe systems approach, a key pillar of that is being proactive. Safety is proactive. There, we should identify and mitigate latent risk on the transportation system rather than waiting for the collisions to happen and then trying to come up with a mitigation. And why I think that this might be a bigger issue than it appears from the historical crash data, we'll see that in the next slide. So Bruce, if you could advance the slide, please. So if you look at, the recent Institute for Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, IIHS study, we find that they did a study in 2022 and they found that pedestrian fatality in the case of a crash that involves a right turn by automobile, they were 89% higher for pickups and 63% higher for SUVs compared to a passenger car. So if a pedestrian, if a passenger car hits a pedestrian versus an SUV hitting a pedestrian, the odds of the pedestrians getting killed is 63% higher for the SUV, and same number is 89% for pickup trucks. Now, what we know about our vehicle fleet, what's happening? Close to 4 out of 5 new personal automobiles, 78.5%, sold in the US in year 2021 were a pickup or an SUV. So we know that our fleet is changing, our automobile fleet in our country is changing to become more SUV, more pickup trucks compared to passenger cars. It used to be only 50. So, and these are like new purchases, right? So obviously we have fleet turnover take some time, but we know that this is happening. We know we are moving to a fleet that when tries to make a right turn on intersections or at any location, they are more likely to kill pedestrians and bicyclists because our fleet is getting bigger. So now the question is this sort of new mix of fleet, is this showing up in our collision data? So let's look at some trends in the collision data in California. So if you look at this fatality rate per collision reported, and you look at the 3-year average, so I start this average from 2011 to 13, and then we go all the way up to 2022, which was the last year of the complete data, that 3-year period that we had complete data for. And you can start to see that our fatality rate, so per 1,000 right turn pedestrian collision, so right turn, and I shouldn't say just pedestrian collision, I should say motor vehicle pedestrian collision. And you can start to see that our numbers that used to fluctuate between 6.3 to 6.6 have basically jumped up to become 12.9 of a fatal collision per 1,000 right turn pedestrian collisions. So that number, that 3-year average, is moving upward and upward and upward. And I think part of that we can, and this number will continue to rise as we continue to purchase more SUVs compared to passenger cars. I think that might be the correlation, and that's what tells me that a proactive approach for us would be to try to see if we can mitigate that crisis before we start to see even larger number of pedestrians and bicyclists getting hit by right turning cars, because those cars, as we know, are getting bigger and bigger and maybe potentially be causing. So from a safe systems perspective, if you want to be more proactive, you maybe have to take steps now and trying to do something about this problem that may not look very big on the data right now, but might potentially be a bigger concern, especially in light of the fact that with these newer cars, allowing right turn on red may not be as fuel efficient as we thought it was in the 1970s. Next slide, please. So some conclusions and some potential policy options. I think considering prohibition of right turn on red through signalized intersection is actually consistent with the safe systems approach. So I think from a safe systems perspective, I think if the cities and the communities want to do it, I think we should be removing barriers for them rather than having the statewide policy act as a barrier for those communities. And rather than trying to prohibit or permit right turn on red on an intersection by intersection basis, the law or the statewide policy should provide some options, right? Allow the cities to place blanket bans on RTOR, and they should be allowed to maybe place on like, for example, San Francisco should be able to do it without it being cost prohibitive in terms of signs. And then allow cities to ban RTOR at select intersections. And definitely, option B could be another thing, like, if you have high pedestrian cycle, are there transit priority areas and newly designed intersections, you should be able to prohibit those, at least at those intersections. Now, one thing, a caveat I want to add is that if you are going to prohibit right turn on red, right, by definition, there is going to be more right turn on green that will happen. And we, fortunately, we do have a good measure for how to improve pedestrian safety if you do have vehicles making right turn on green signal. And that is the leading pedestrian interval. So we should make sure that if you are going to have a right turn on red prohibition, be prepared for more right turns to happen during the green interval. And for that, we should definitely provision a leading pedestrian interval, because otherwise, I think you might be running into a situation where you might have made things worse for pedestrians. If you don't do LPI along with the RTOR prohibition, that might create some more challenges. So definitely, any kind of prohibition on right turn on red should simultaneous implementation of leading pedestrian interval would be necessary. So next slide. Yeah, I think this is the end of the presentation. I saw there are a ton of questions and a lot of information on chat. So Ben, I would hope that you can sort of start to feed us some questions. I'm just thinking like which one I should take first, so I'm gonna probably mess it up. So I would prefer if you could just, start giving us some questions that you want us to talk about.
Sure, I'll just go through the list really quick because we do have a couple of dozen. Let's see. Uh, do you think there's any chance of getting right turn on red outlawed in California at the state level? If not, do you have a list of cities that have implemented bans at the local level?
No, I think we don't have a list in California, at least. I know, in Washington, D.C., they have prohibited it starting 2025. But I was looking at some data even yesterday, if they have published anything since then. They haven't published any studies on that. Although that policy, again, because of the federal, government, because they control a lot of the DC DOT, that may be in jeopardy. We don't know for sure. But for now, the policy remains. But again, the enforcement has been spotty. Seattle has implemented that on any newly signalized intersection. They are going to ban right turn on red. So I'm familiar with that policy. Within California, I think you have to put up signs on intersections. Wherever you are prohibiting it, you have to put up those signs. So that because of that, I believe no city in California has attempted it. And that's at least that's my understanding of the current situation. And in terms of getting it banned throughout the state, I think as progressive as California is, as the rest of the country think we are, I don't think we are that progressive. So probably not going to happen anytime soon, at least in terms of statewide. I think our hope and expectation is that if the communities want to do it, the statewide policy shouldn't be a complete barrier to them, is what I'm thinking about. Mhm. Bruce, feel
All
free to
right.
add something
Oh, go
if you
ahead.
wanna.
Yeah,
Did you
sorry,
have
I was
anything
on
to
mute.
add, Bruce?
I should also add that that Anurag and I worked with the California State Assembly on this project to help
Yeah.
advise them on what they should do. And thinking that it might be really tough to do a statewide ban on right turn on red, that we offered the option for cities to choose themselves to ban right turn on red maneuvers, and and with the idea that uh, that spot per, prohibition of right turn red could be pretty expensive in terms of signage. So the idea that a city could say, we ban right turn on reds in this city. We're a right turn on red free city, and except for areas that we specifically signed to allow it. So those are some of the thoughts we had in terms of recommending things to the state legislature.
All right, the next question. Do you see right turn on red bans and LPI as complementary strategies, or are there situations where right turn on red bans alone could shift the risk rather than reduce it?
I think LPI has to go along with it because by definition, there will be more. If you don't implement LPI, there is going to be more right turn being made on green. And when that happens without the leading pedestrian interval, that could be pretty significant jeopardy for the pedestrian. So I would say that, those have to go hand in hand. So I think without that, you could be creating some additional problem for pedestrians if you don't allow the LPI, if you
Yeah,
prohibit right turn on red.
yeah, I would agree to that, and it's something we thought about that banning right turn on red needs to have a complementary measure to protect the people who are walking in the green.
All right, next question. Has anybody explored signalized approaches such as having red arrows when a pedestrian crossing is activated?
I think red arrows basically, is another way of saying right turn on red is prohibited. Like, but I think in California, I've always seen signs no turn on red to go along with those. But to me, at least, the right arrow, basically, if you put a red right arrow, that means no turn on red that's what I take it to mean. But I know that in California, they do have to, uh, you know,
All right, next question. If right turn on red is banned and more right turns happen on the green, do you have any evidence that LPI fully offsets the risk to pedestrians?
I don't have the full data, but it may or yeah, I don't think it's fully offsets. Like I haven't looked at that data. Yeah, no, I don't off the
Yeah,
top of my head know of the study.
yeah, I haven't either. It's just it's more anecdotal.
All right, the next question.
But we know that LPI has
Go
a
ahead.
crash modification factor
Yeah,
that shows you that yes, you will improve safety. And again, and we know that banning right turn on red has not been associated with increased pedestrian risks as well. So I'm thinking it should be able to offset, but again, I haven't looked at that specific question directly.
All right, next question. Is there any data correlating the safety of bicyclists in jurisdictions where the Idaho stop is permitted? I guess associated to how that interacts with right turns on red.
I'm not aware of any. I've not seen that data yet. But it sounds, I mean, but I think it's interesting to think about it that there could be an interaction there with the Idaho stop. Although I think the Idaho stop is a good measure as it puts on the bicyclists' personal responsibility for their safety and trusts them with making the right decision. So I think in practice, they can probably be complementary.
Okay, next question. How does the crash and fatality rate differ for right turn on green versus right turn on red?
Yeah, see, this is the
Yeah.
data we could not, like, we were trying so hard to kind of figure out, if we can tease that out of the overall. This was a, project we were trying to tease that out of the collision data. It's just that we could not get what was the signal indication when the collision happened, from the data that we had available. And we even looked at trying to get at least a sample of the collision reports that we could not get access to. So yeah, that was a question we would love to have the answer to, but we don't have that, unfortunately. We just could not get the Switrus data in a way that could tell us what was the signal indication,
Yeah,
and
we
and
looked at
that's
right.
why. Go
Go
go go
ahead.
ahead.
Go
No, no,
ahead,
sorry.
Anurag.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and we looked at the right turn collisions as well as the failure to yield collisions. So we were trying to triangulate a bit on that, but it was hard for us to break it out as you mentioned.
We had a question if there is there a paper available for this research yet?
Yes, we're working on a manuscript and we're working on getting it submitted. Email us and we can give you an advance copy to review without circulation. And we also have a report that should be coming out soon through the Center for Pedestrian and Bicyclist Safety.
All right. When cities are in the process of deciding to ban right turn on red, are there any reliable methods to identify left-looking bias or related pedestrian conflicts at intersections?
That's a great question. I think it would take kind of a simulated or actually like on the ground evaluation of where people are looking when they're making their turns. So that's something we weren't able to do, but this is a theoretical exercise that the turns the car traffic coming from the left is likely distracting the drivers from seeing pedestrians and bicyclists enter from the left. I mean, from the right. But that's a good question.
Next question. Let's see. Is there any data to indicate success or lack thereof associated with electronic no right turn on red signs that alternate the permissive nature of right turn on red?
Yeah, so there is some data from the Human Factors Guide, like that published it. This is an NCHRP research, and if you search for Human Factors Guide, you'll find some. I think they did find that all sorts of signs have success. I think one of the things that they did find was that yeah, any kind of signage, especially electronic signage, is generally, gets better attention of the drivers. I think one thing that they did note was that you can't have, these confusing instructions, no turn on red except 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. and things like that. As long as once you start putting these different time of days and all of that, then you get basically not as much compliance with that. So that was the challenge that they encountered. But other than that, I think, yeah. So there is some. If you search for human factors guide, I think they do publish some. They do have some research on trying to prohibit. So right turn on red prohibition is one of their case studies actually in that human factors guide that was published by NCHRP.
And I should mention that one of the things we tried to do in our research that I think we'd still like to do is go to intersections that have had right turn on red bans and then look at collisions before and after. So we were actually trying to get the data in Los Angeles for places that they had prohibited right turn on red maneuvers, and we wanted to check things before and after. So that was one thing we wanted to study.
All right, we had a couple of questions about basically just what do you think about the municipality by municipality approach of banning right turns on red? Basically, like, wouldn't that be really confusing to drivers who are from out of town that might not comply or might not realize what's going on?
That's certainly a factor, and we would hope that the signage could be clear enough to when you enter to a city that you understand that it's the right turn on reds are prohibited. And
Yeah. And then we have the New York City example as well, right? New York City obviously attracts a lot of tourists, a lot of drivers, and a lot of maybe out of town drivers as well. So they have made it work, right? So I think that's probably should be possible. But yeah, I think that'll be a concern initially. And so the city will have to do a good sort of outreach to the community and the tourists and maybe signs at the airport and at rental car counters, for example, those kind of places.
mhm. But it's a really good point.
Another question, do you have any sources of data for right turn on red for states other than California? Is there a national database or anything like that?
There's not a national database similar to the one we worked with in California. Anurag, do you know of any?
No, I'm not sure. I haven't. We didn't for this study. We were specifically focused on California. Yeah, I'm not aware of like any national data set that looks specifically at like crashes that occurred. Yeah, right turn on red crashes. No.
All right, next question. Is there any data on driver behavior at when they're doing a right turn on red as far as how many come to a complete stop versus how many creep through the intersection?
Oh, I'm sure there is. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I think in terms of behavior and so I think Washington D.C. when they decided on this policy, they did look at some video recording of the driver behavior at intersection where the right turn on red was prohibited versus where it wasn't, and they did find that that improves compliance. And I see in the chat somebody mentioned that actually it improved. Pedestrian, the failure to yield to pedestrian also went down during green intervals when NTOR was implemented. So there is a study that somebody has noted in the chat. So I feel like, yeah, so those data are out there. I'm not sure what that number was off the top of my head, but we know that yeah, anecdotally, a lot of people do not make that full stop before they make right turn on red. So, but again, I don't remember that off the top of my head, but I'm sure Washington D.C. when they did the study, they do include that information in their video and video analytics that they did.
All right, next question. How much does land use matter for right turn on red?
Oh, I think it's really important. Yeah, sorry,
yeah.
Anurag.
No,
Yeah.
go ahead, please, Bruce. Yeah, no, absolutely, it's very important.
In the highlight of in the intersections we highlighted, land use seemed to be very important in terms of tracking walking and bicycling behavior, as well as adding to sort of the sense of place and probably possible distraction. But they were also very auto-oriented too. So land uses in sort of high concentrations in downtowns probably have a different feel than ones that are in a more suburban auto-oriented environment that could lead to more distraction from cross traffic and things like that. But I think land use is very important, and I think land uses, especially that might have high pedestrian and bicycle generation, should be looked at first for right turn on red bans.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think land use is absolutely important. And that's kind of the overall, if you kind of take one conclusion from this work that we did, is that, because the land use is so important, if the communities want to ban or they're looking to expand pedestrian access or make the environment better for the pedestrians in their land use, they should be allowed to do that. They shouldn't have a policy that's creating that barrier. So yeah, absolutely land use is pretty important from a safety perspective, from what the cities are trying to do in their communities, and then so yeah, absolutely, land use is a very important consideration.
All right. How valid is the concern that banning right turn on red would cause excessive queuing?
Yeah, that's going to be a traffic, engineering question, and that's something that we want to decide. The one thing I would say though is that yes, there would be some, maybe some increase in queuing, but think about this a little bit, right? So if you are talking about the peak hour conditions, there is traffic flow from all directions anyway, right? So during peak hour, the traffic is already pretty bad. Like maybe there is one or two right turns that can be made or something like that. And because there is going to be a constant stream of cars coming from the other side, so it's going to be a challenge. So I think in some ways it won't affect the peak hour as much because the peak hour is going to be already very congested. I think it will slow down people during the off-peak hour. So to me, the relevant question would be, what happens between right before the peak or right after the peak hours, and those will be the times that I would study, to kind of make sure that we're studying the impact of. But I think overall, I would say that it shouldn't be a big concern in our urban communities because during peak hour the congestion is pretty bad anyway. And then if you can slow down folks during the off-peak conditions, that might overall be a benefit in some ways too. But again, we didn't look at that specific traffic operations at individual intersection as one of the performance measures.
All right. Next question. Do you have any thoughts about crashes involving right turn on red where there are bike lanes or without bike lanes or cycle tracks or anything like that?
So is that where there are bike tracks or cycle
Yeah, where
tracks?
there are versus there are not.
Yeah. Well, I think I think right turns into cyclists into bike lanes is a big issue. So I think that right turn on red prohibitions could probably help quite a bit. What do you think, Anurag?
Yeah, no, I agree with what you just said. Yeah. So, but again, we didn't specifically look at the individual locations. We were kind of more interested in how do we kind of make it, does the RTOR policy, or at least allowing cities to be able to do this, is this consistent with the safe systems approach in some ways? And we were looking at some sort of macro level data rather than individual location.
Mm-hmm.
Next question, similar. Do you think the faster speeds of e-bikes will affect the crash history at intersections with right turn on red?
That's interesting. I mean, if a faster bicyclist comes up on you when you're stopped and you're making a right turn, that could possibly be something. What do you think, Anurag?
Yeah, no, I think I agree with that. Although I haven't engaged with that particular question. I'm an e-bike rider myself, and I feel like I do feel safer when I'm riding the e-bike because I just have a little bit more control over how fast or slow I can go from a location. Whereas on a regular bike, I'm limited by my physical strength alone. So yes, I do feel like it could be potentially, but it could cause you to kind of run into that. But I feel like as a e-bike rider, I feel like I'm a little bit in control. But yeah, but so that could potentially help. But I can see like how if there are some teen drivers or teen ride e-bike riders, which there are many now, if they're being a little bit less, if they're being a little bit more reckless, then that could be a problem for vehicles trying to turn right and and crashing into them.
Next question. Do you think drivers with tinted windows have any effect on this?
Oh,
Hmm.
that's a good point too. I mean, if you're able to see this or not see this, but that would have, I think, yeah, specific to this question, I'm not sure. I'll have to think about it a little bit.
Mhm.
All right. Next question. Where do you hope to take this research next?
As I mentioned some of it that I'd like to, if we can look at things, look at actual intersections that have had changes and see what collisions have changed, what things have changed, and maybe some before and after video footage would be great. There was also a question in the chat about exposure data, and unfortunately we didn't do that, but we could go back and look at that more. Uh, uh, we could look at that more specifically and fine tune our analysis even better. Anurag, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things that I think there is some good information, and I think I would be very interested in kind of seeing the experience from DC. What happened. Like obviously they had done some analysis of the yielding behavior, but I would love to see if there is right turn collisions, what has happened to them. Have they gone down overall? So I think looking at Washington DC data would be of interest. I think the newly signalized intersections in Seattle would be another one that that might be another potential way to kind of tease out. And then in general, like I think if we can somehow get like our hands on the crash data, maybe potentially looking at the actual crash reports and trying to see if there was a right turn on red specifically involved in some cases, if there was like any information, maybe in the officer's description or something like that that
Yeah.
indicated. So I would love to kind of tease that out as well. So I think so my two directions would be, can we get a handle on some actual crash reports and trying to tie right turn on red specifically, like if the turns were made on red for certain crashes, and then the other would be looking at the collision data from these communities that have attempted to ban it recently. So that's kind of where I'm at, right? So obviously New York City, they've been like that for a long time. I know a couple of communities, other communities that were mentioned in the chat. So they've been there for a long time, but I'm interested in folks who are cities who have made recent changes and what happened there. Is there some collision, information that we can glean from that? That would be, I think, something I'll look at. And the other thing I would say is like some excellent examples of research being shared on the chat about, you know, what happened when there was car queues. So those are, the car queues increase was like 5% or something. So yeah, no, there is some good information in the chat, and I would love to kind of maybe pursue that and see if there is some research ideas there as well. So thank you for sharing those.
Yes, and I would just sort of add, also looking at the crash narratives, taking a deeper dive into the right turn collisions and the fail to yield collisions, and looking at more deeply, and actually pictures of the field to get a better sense of what truly constituted a right turn on red collision. So I am in total agreement with Anurag for us to look at the crash narratives, but also take a deeper dive on these two types of data on right turn and failure to yield to get a better sense of things.
All right, next question. Have you seen any studies or data about the difference in crashes where the crosswalk is like right there at the corner versus maybe set back 10 or 20 feet from further from the intersection?
I'm not aware of anything, but that's a really good question.
Could you repeat that question? I was sorry, I was looking at a chat comment about Cambridge's full RTOR ban in 2024. So I was kind of thinking about that crash data. So sorry, I missed the question. Could you repeat it, please?
Sure, yeah. Just have you seen any data or studies that look at the difference between crashes where the crosswalk is right there at the corner radius versus where the crosswalk might be set back like 10 or 20 feet further from the intersection?
Oh yeah, no, I think those are yeah, that'll be a good thing to study as well, right? Like, and maybe there is some correlation with if you're deciding based on the individual intersection. But again, we were kind of focused on the more macro level picture, so we didn't get to that specific question on the crosswalk for on this research. But that yeah, that could be an important factor.
We did a follow-up too. Do you know if the ITE or NACTO has any policy or guidance on this issue? I do know that NACTO prefers to make corners like squared off a little more so that drivers are more perpendicular to the crosswalk when they're turning rather than sort of sideswiping.
Yeah, so I mean, no, I think that's a good point, right? So there is some guidance on, like, so we know that, if you're kind of trying to slip lanes and stuff, those are kind of like, yeah. So, but if you look at the protected intersections, obviously they want you to come in at a 90-degree angle. So I think, yeah, so that's I'm not, Bruce, if you have, I don't know, specific guidance on that crosswalk design, but yeah, it's not ringing precisely where do I find that guidance at, but maybe
Right.
Bruce, you
No,
do.
no, it's a good point. I mean, I think I don't know exactly where you'd find the information on a different crosswalk design, but I think it's a great
But
question.
NACTO would be a good source to kind of look at. I know ITE probably doesn't have it, but NACTO would be a good source of that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. NACTO would be good.
Yeah, I would think the NACTO Urban Street Design Guide would probably be the go-to resource on that. Let's see. Do you have, let's see. What, yeah, well, I guess somebody just changed their question. They said, given that there isn't specific threshold or guidelines for prohibiting right turn on red, what are the best practices for cities to consider when selecting intersections to make a no right
I,
turn
I,
on
I
red?
think intersections with a lot of pedestrian bicycle activity, um, uh, land use, some decent land use intensity, and and high speeding cross traffic, just like we showed in our case studies. I think those would be some of the things that I would look at. Anurag, do you have any other suggestions?
No, no, I think that's a great point. I think, and one thing I would say is that also, like, maybe places where you want to increase pedestrian activity, right? So maybe being a little
Right.
bit more proactive about, where you want to encourage pedestrian activity, and trying to look at those locations, those land uses where maybe you have a new transit center coming, or maybe new transit stop coming, for example. Kind of being proactive and trying to look at those locations, and maybe examine those operational effects, right? So maybe the operational effects won't be that bad. So kind of analyzing the traffic, and maybe more proactively banning right turn on red might be useful. So
Yeah,
just
that's what.
to add to Bruce's suggestion, look at, like, your near future land use as well, not just what's right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, and what Anurag's touching on is what we found in San Francisco's statement that says, while the injuries and collisions might not be tremendous, it's still a degradation of the walking and bicycling environment. So it's about if you want to create a livable street or a livable environment, ban right turn on red.
All right. Next question. What do you think about having no right turn on red for cars, but allowing it for bicycles at the same intersection?
I think that sounds fine as long as the bicyclists who will travel with more care do travel with more
Right.
care, and they probably will. So I think that could work. It's like an Idaho stop.
Yeah. And it's kind of, and it's a little bit of a tangent, but we've tried with Idaho stop, I think we've kind of tried to make that our policy in the state. We've tried a few, I mean, the state legislature has tried a few times. I think it has been vetoed by the governor a couple of times as well. So someday California will be as progressive as Idaho.
All right, next question. Do you have any data or observations on right turn on red where there are two right turn lanes?
Ooh, that's a good one. God, I saw one of the worst I've ever seen was in Santa Ana in Los Angeles. It was high-speed right turns that were being made. I think that's a really great question, and they should be looked at with cautious eyes. But that's all I know. Anurag, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yes, that'll be worth looking into. Again, our issue was that we were looking at more sort of macro level, question here. So we didn't get to like, individual site details. We were kind of trying to help cities if they've decided that, they want to adopt this policy, how can we make sure that the state gets there? So we're trying to look at some macro level data and see how with the fleet size increases, how the things were, this could become a bigger problem. So we should allow the cities to do what they need to do here. But those will be really interesting questions for individual sites. But just a little bit, something that we were not focused on when we were doing this research.
All right, and then since we're getting close to the end here, we do have a fair number of questions that kind of ask where people can find data for their own usage if they want to advocate for no right turn on red in their community, or look at case studies and things like that. Do you guys have any good sources that you found in the process of doing this research?
Yeah,
Well,
so there is a DC study in the ITE journal that was mentioned in the chat. So I think that's that might be a good place to start. Pretty comprehensive, and I think they have some older data as well when they looked at the yielding behavior of the drivers using video data. So you should be able to look for some Washington DC based work. I think I see there's the NCHRP, the National Academy's report on reducing conflicts between turning motor vehicles and bicycles. That could be another useful research, that you could look at. And I think one thing that Connecticut DOT research that we found in terms of the emissions, that people automatically think like if we are going to ban right turn on red, we're just going to be that much worse on emissions. But that may or may not always be the case. So something to keep an open mind on that too.
Great. I'll let you guys close it out here with any closing thoughts.
Well, I think one of the things that we talked about are that right turn on red collisions are not inconsequential. It's not a insignificant amount. And if you want to create a better, more livable street, even though the collisions might not be the worst there are, you want to ban right turn on red to make it more inviting for your pedestrians and cyclists. Again, I think land use activity, cross traffic, pedestrian activity, street cross traffic volumes are all really important. And I think that again, to create more livable streets, I would consider the right turn on red bans that we discussed. Anurag?
Yeah, no, I think that's so I would say that, yes, if the cities want to do it, like they know their context the best. If the cities want to do it, our statewide policy shouldn't be a barrier to them doing it. So
Yeah.
that's my take.
Yeah, it'll be probably challenging. I think there's also a term of adjustment that, as was mentioned, if different cities adopt right turn on red bans than others, it might lead to some confusion. But there should be public service, public messaging campaigns, and I think once people get an understanding that right turn on reds aren't always permitted, then that should lead to people down a path that can actually accept them being prohibited. So I hope that gives everybody some food for thought to actually help make this happen.
Yeah, thank you both for those awesome presentations and all the information, and thank you to all the attendees as well. I think that was probably the most engagement we've had in any of our webinars. It was really awesome to hear all these different perspectives. So thank you, everybody. Just a quick plug. We've got our next webinar in 2 weeks. Please tune into that. We'll be focusing on vulnerable road user safety around transit. We've got Candace Brakewood and Allison Rewalt from University of Tennessee presenting on that one. Feel free to check out our website, follow us on LinkedIn, sign up for our newsletter, and all that good stuff. So again, thank you, everybody, and see you next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.